Hello! Welcome to the podcast from Duendelvin. I'm Taylor, and in this podcast, we will be exploring the world of Savarion. Here we have Jeff and Kyle. Today, we will be discussing the Orcs. What do they look like?
Ooh, that's fair. Our orcs are more traditional orc look appearance, kind of tribal. They wear furs, and then armor depending on. But unlike the Lord of the Rings orcs that are very messy, or same thing with the 40k orcs who are very wild and just have scraps of metal pieced together and their willpower forces it. No, they have very tailored, very well kept, very well mannered. They still have green skin, greenish tint to their skin, and they have tusks. That's still standard. And they're tall. I believe we're talking like 6'8" feet-ish, yeah, for the males, and like I'm trying to remember, 6'4", 6'5" for the females.
Yeah, they're the second tallest of the 9 races.
So if you take them and a minotaur together, you get two options, really short or really big. But yeah.
All right. Are they a matriarchy or a patriarchy?
So our orcs are a patriarchy, and they're led by a Najushi. And how their system works is they have 12 like tribes, right? And so you have the different tribal leaders make up their council, right? And then the Najushi is selected with this is our only race that has it blood, like you're born into it. But instead of being the firstborn, the orcs do it as whichever one of them fulfills or demonstrates a desire to fulfill the divine purpose the best. So it doesn't matter where in their lineup they are, just as long as they exemplify their divine purpose the most effectively.
All right. How do they govern?
So we have the 12 tribes like we talked about, and then there's the Najushi who has ultimate power. He has a war leader, a general, that they stay in close contact with. And then they also have the 12 tribal representatives. And so each one of them comes in, and they actually have a very busy bureaucratic system because they're trying to take in a lot of information. So they actually have a hall that the leaders of the 12 tribes and their scribes and their support teams all stay at while they're in Kungan, because they have homes and they're representing different areas from different lands across the Orc plains. So the Orcs live in the plains, which is ironically our most dangerous biome of all the different lands in Savarion. The most dangerous is the plains. Yeah.
Alrighty. Anything else on that topic?
I mean, not really. They everything is done through paperwork and functionality. The orcs work as a group as a whole. It's all about the greater good for all, for them. Payments are made in through like grown crops, because Kungan itself doesn't have a lot of room to grow. It is designed to house and hold people. So a lot of it is paperwork on tracking, okay, who brought what in, how much is going into the stores, how much is going back to the people, the number of populations they have, who needs what, where, which regions aren't doing as well and are struggling, who needs the most support. So a lot of the negotiation that 12 tries to do with an Ajushi is figuring out where does aid need to go, who is struggling, and then who has stepped outside of their divine purpose, and who needs, every now and again, a tribe needs to get cleansed, because there's the 12 tribal leaders, and underneath them they have smaller tribes that make up their whole grouping.
All right. So what is this divine purpose?
So the orcs were designed to be protective in nature. And this was a protect your people mentality more than a protect the land mentality. So it's very like it would be the greatest thing you could accomplish was to protect your city. And then Kungin has these huge walls that during the day are like this white, almost a marbly or alabaster white kind of a color. And then at night, there's this blue glow to it. And around the wall, there's these things called a soul forge. And when you die, you get put into the soul forge. And so your body goes away and your soul becomes part of the wall of Kungin, which is why after the affirmation, the only still standing city is Kungin, because nobody can destroy it. It was part of the divine purpose was to protect your people, and the divine gift was the soul forge, so that the souls were protecting the wall. So even after death, you still are protecting your people. And so the walls are impregnable, and like not even the Horakai destroy them with Parvulkan's weapons. And so that's, I guess, their divine purpose, but how they fulfill it even after death.
Mm-hmm.
So.
All right, that's so interesting. What does their home look like then?
So, so Kungin is set in the plains, so it's kind of a little bit of hills and stuff, but mostly just flat, grassy, plainlands, which you would think of. Like if you closed your eyes and said, what do I think of when I think of plains? It's like big, open, grassy fields, right? And the most dangerous wild animals that are in Savarion live in the plains. And so Kungin is this city, this giant walled city, all the way around, and it has an inner layer as well. So an outer layer and another layer. And so you have homes inside of the city, but it's all very, like, it's nice but rigid, if that makes sense. Like everything is the same over and over and over again, right? So all your streets are straight lines. I guess they would be curved around the wall, but it wouldn't be like you have, this off crowd in here and da-da-da. And everything is very systematic. Everything makes a lot of sense. The roofs are flat, so that they can grow crops on top of their roofs. And then in the inner area, would it be your nicer buildings, your
Governmental buildings.
your government buildings, stuff like that, are on the inside of it. So.
All right, that's pretty cool.
Kungin was designed to be the refuge for every race if a major cataclysmic event happened. Before everyone's divine purpose got corrupted, Kungin was big enough to hold everybody. Not comfortably, but you could all live there, work there, thrive there, support each other in that capacity within Kungin. So it's like a bunch of apartment complexes stacked on top of each other as well. So you have lots of very close-in living.
Yeah.
Interesting.
And then because of that design, as they expand, right? What we talked about with the dwarves a couple weeks ago, where they built the bridges over the plains.
Mm-hmm.
So this allowed people access to get from Kungin to the outer territories without actually stepping foot in the plains. And so they could take what they had, the information they had, and build like mini Kungins. And the walls weren't soul forged the same way that Kungin was, so they could be destroyed, but they used a similar material to build those walls, and then the sky bridges is what we're calling them.
Yeah.
So you could actually never leave and have to walk around on the plains because they were so dangerous. And the dwarves helped them build that.
That's really cool.
One of their very dangerous animals is a burrower. And so what they had to do is they had cities when they first were trying to spread out there. And this burrower wasn't always a dangerous creature. It wasn't designed to be a predator, but it became very aggressive and very territorial after Vagog's intrusion. And so they had to find a way to protect all their cities. So all of their cities are actually first built from a bubble. The wall starts at the base and it bubbles its way out and around and protects the city from underground as well. So that way the burrower tries to get in, just bonk right into the wall. He ain't getting through. And that's what they did to protect themselves from the biggest threat. But you've also got other terrifying beasts that lay in ambush in the tall grass. And so before the skyways were made, you had orcs dying in droves, whole clans wiped out by natural creatures. Yeah.
Wow.
So they're very martial and out of necessity. That's actually part of why in the board game their power, their racial skill is to have more martial strength. It made sense because it was helping them to survive and fight off the creatures that they had in their own homeland. Yeah.
That's pretty cool. All
That's-
right. Is that it on their homes?
For the most part, yeah. I don't think there's anything else special about it than the fact that it's not uncommon to lose entire cities if there's a breach in the wall. Like, you'll have whole, like, swaths of people have to evacuate. And these spaces, once one of these, I'm going to call them planescrawlers, takes a spot, it becomes its territory, and it doesn't let it go. You have to go in there and kill it, and it can take, like, half an army to put one down in their full adulthood. You can find some juvenile ones that are still massive and terrifying, but a full size is going to take a full army to put down.
Wow. So how do these differ from other fantasy orcs?
Oh man. So like, with our 40k orcs, they are, for lack of a better phrase, they're stupid. They be crumping, they got the choppers, they got the shooters, they have their skill sets where there is this sense of, we do this because we follow the biggest and the strongest. And our orcs don't have that. They're not guided by who's the biggest, strongest, baddest war boss. They still operate in clans, but we don't have to worry about that. They also don't have psychic powers. Some of the orcs and other sons. Oh.
We'll get to it in a second.
Yeah, we got a question from Dave, which is awesome, and I can't read it from my vantage point, so I'm gonna have to.
I'll read it.
Get to that in a minute.
I did want to also say, like, orcs typically, like Kyle was saying, are viewed as stupid, right? In Savarion, the only non-human to have ever completed the maze was an orc.
Yep.
And so orcs are incredibly intelligent. All of the races in Savarion are intelligent. There's not like a dumb one. And so we don't really present them that way. The same as some other ones where they're just like snarling beasts and stuff like that. In Savarion, orcs are incredibly intelligent. And very
caring.
And caring.
Yeah.
Protective, caring. And under their divine purpose, they would be protecting of anyone. So, but, all right. Davey said we've also touched on beasts before and not how terrifying they are, but haven't heard much specifics. Can we look forward to a Savarion bestiary one day? Oh, yeah.
Absolutely. We are in the process of like actually putting a stat block for all of our creatures. Because obviously if you're going to build a role-playing game like D&D, you need to have a bestiary so that you have encounters that can happen, but also an understanding of what the creatures can do. So yes, it is in the works. It is happening. And
we have something like 80 different animals right now.
And climbing.
Like
because there's more coming.
Yeah, there's definitely more coming, but we have quite a few animals. And yeah, we're calling everything the book of. So we do have a book of animals and plants.
Yep.
So that will be coming down the line one day.
It is on
But
the
that'll
way.
probably come in with the role-playing game.
So we're a couple years out from getting it. We might be able to do some smaller releases, like we can do like these are the creatures and you can expect to find in the plains. These are the creatures you can, and so we can have some small excerpts. I'm really excited to be able to release maybe on the website.
That'll be cool, yeah.
Especially when we get the artwork that's being created. We have another artist who's working behind the scenes to give our life, or give more vibrant life to our plants and our animals beyond just the spore generated creatures we have made.
Right. Yeah. So we do have an artist. Her name's Paula, and she's actively working on some of the plants that we have, and I'll see about posting some of her stuff on just some of the plant life. Maybe we can talk about that. We're really focused on the board game right now with our social media, but maybe we can post a
Yeah.
couple of those pictures might be fun.
I mean, we do
So-
have a plant that its description is it looks like a rock.
It does.
It does. It looks like a rock. I mean, you go there and you're like, oh, that was a plant. I just crushed this whole plant. So we've got some fun things. All right, we have another statement from Dave. I can't read from this vantage.
Are there any planes monsters or NPC monsters on the tabletop?
No.
Yeah, the tabletop. Oh,
The board
he
game.
said, I mean the board game.
Yeah.
So, no, not in the board game. There's already enough going on in the board game between, like, the fighting between you and the other players and the board itself, and then the weather events that happen. All of those things are fighting against you in Savarion. I mean, literally, like, it's designed to be an unforgiving game. And so we don't have, like, animals in the board game.
It also makes sense too because what you're doing is you're marshaling an army, and you're engaged in this loud, ruckus noise of combat, wild magics flying everywhere, and just people screaming and dying. The aftermath of a battlefield would definitely have carrion creatures that come in, and things end up sprouting up. But we can talk about our undead variants another time. I think we talked about them a little bit in the creation. So there's that alone would keep the wildlife from actively engaging with the units, because if every single unit is represented as a actual like combat unit, a military sized force, then you're not going to have animals trying to attack these massive groupings of people. So
And to some degree, I mean, if we're totally transparent, there's only so much you can do in a board game
true.
without it being way too complicated, and then you might as well just be playing the role-playing game. So, yeah. So, I mean, could it have something like that have happened in the story? Sure, but that's a pretty complicated addition to the board game.
Right? Like we don't actually have mounted combat in our board game. Everything is foot soldier.
Right.
Mounted combat wasn't something that was necessitated, we like storyline wise, until after the affirmation, when you suddenly had a need to put more beasts of burden to work, put more than just travel. Urbasols became a more necessary piece of. I don't know why I do the wrong emphasis on the syllables sometimes, but
I don't either.
it gets funny, but yeah, the mounted combat wasn't developed until the empires came together, because it wasn't seen as a thing that you wanted to do. You didn't want to endanger the life of an Irbasol in a wartime situation. So they didn't. They were considered a more precious resource.
Yep.
Yeah. All right. Well, any other questions from us, chat, or Miss Taylor? Anything you want to know?
Well, is there anything else on orcs that you guys didn't touch on that we would like to?
We didn't talk about Clat, and he is your
Yeah.
favorite.
I was gonna say it's interesting because when you look through the story, so Clat's my favorite of the 9 leaders, and I actually, when I took the test, I didn't come up with an orc. Some got to, but I I like Clat, and so when we wrote him as part of the story, I mean, some of the reason that he is who he is and the things that he does in the story we'll get into is because of my connection with him, because I liked him so much. But it's funny, before then and after then, there's not a whole lot of notable orcs that we talk about throughout history. I mean, there was one who was part of the original 9 that imprisoned Vagog, and then there was one who was a member of the Keepers of the Peace, and then there's Clat. And Clat was the youngest of his family line, but
That's something
he...
to talk about. The way their family life is and their size, but keep
Oh,
going.
yeah, we can talk about that as well. But yeah, Clat was the youngest, and so he pursued being a priest. And so his whole life was about being protecting his people and looking after his people and following Parbukon, and which isn't a great choice, but
You don't know any better.
he didn't know any better. Right. And then when the war kicked off, he decided that he was going to tap into his martial side as well. So he's the reason that the idea of a paladin even exists. So you have a healer and a heavy hitter mixed into one. He's the first one to have done that. And that's the reason that when he went toe to toe with it's Valthamos.
Valthamos, yep.
Valthamos.
The oldest of the Kamatai.
Yeah, he could actually hold his own. And again, like that fight wasn't like a face-off in a ring one-on-one. Like Clat met him in the field, and Valthamos didn't think he needed to focus all of his energy, and he had his mind, which could engage in other parts of the war, doing that. So he wasn't fully there when it happened, but in any case, Clat still took him down.
Clat became a godslayer.
Clat the godslayer. But Clat also, when the war kicked off, he wanted to protect his people and tried to make peace. Mm-hmm. And that didn't work out with the humans. And then he tried to make peace with,
he got subverted. Actually, is the story. The way it happens is he had a general who had gone rogue and taken the armies. And when Clat went on his peacekeeping mission, he took a lot of the nobles to try and show the humans that they were not looking for war because their neighbors closest are the humans. His general launched a surprise attack against the humans and effectively got most of their army wiped out. So that's how the Orcs ended up getting ruined, because they had some Horakai machinations. And the Horakai also, we'll get into the human side of it, the Horakai assassinated Rymat's father, who was the leader of the humans, and made it look like Orcs did it.
Right, yeah.
So Clat didn't know that. They had no idea of this going forward, and so Clat went to meet with Rymat. Rymat and Clat were friends. When their parents used to go to the Keeper's Council, because everyone used to go to this thing, they were old enough to have met as children at this council as their parents were meeting and kind of communing with the other races long before it was ever disbanded. That's how Clat was able to go. We didn't talk about the maze really either.
But that's a human thing.
That's a human thing, yeah. But to understand, the maze is a magical construct that was gifted to the humans to help sharpen their intelligence and change the way they think. So Clat being allowed to do that and then succeeding in doing it at his own peril is huge. Mm-hmm. And that's why that makes a big deal. It's not just, he figured out the maze. No, he went through and put his mind and his body at risk to show solidarity with the humans.
Yeah.
And he's the only member of the other 9 who's done it. And so for him to go visit his friend to see how he's doing was all this was at first, and then it turned into realizing that there was some bad blood suddenly between the Orcs and the humans. But that's really it. The Orcs really didn't clash with another race. They kind of got obliterated until they got protected by the Samgatu.
Yeah. Clat took himself and a couple other support units, and they went to Nikawadia and said, hey, we don't want to be, part of this war, and we're here to help. And so the reason that Clat was around when the underworld came up and started fighting with is because of that alliance that they developed.
Oh, yeah.
So.
Oh, man. We'll have to rework some of the positioning, but yeah, you want to read Dave's question out.
Yeah. You were talking about being the youngest of the family for the clan. So is that how the society is structured? Like king oldest son is the heir. Speaking of which, is there a ruling class? So we touched on this at the beginning with it, but it's a Najushi, but the way that it worked was so the Najushi would have a bunch of children and then would look at all of his sons and say which one of them is most dynamically for our divine purpose. Mm-hmm. Who's the most in line with what we were created for, and that's who got chosen to be the king. So it wasn't about just the firstborn, it was about whoever in my line is the most. So
hello again, DTV.
Hi, DTV. And then The Sumgatu are our cat people. And there are 8th of 9 races, so we will cover them completely in, what are we on, 4 right now?
Yep, we're on
so
4.
5, 6, 7, 8. So in a couple of episodes, a couple weeks, we'll talk about the Sumgatu, but they are our cat people, essentially. So, and
yes,
there are strategists.
The orcs have a lot of family. They have a lot of kids. As far as like, I guess family size, the orcs would be the biggest as far as having a family unit. Kind of makes sense considering they have the shortest lifespan. Not overall. They actually lived, I think, like 350 years ish is their average lifespan without unnatural causes.
Mm-hmm.
But because they live in the most dangerous areas, if you want your line to continue, you're going to need to proliferate. Is proliferate the right word? I don't think it's the right word. Propagate. No.
People know what you're talking about.
Yeah, they have lots of kids.
Have lots of kids.
And so their families are big. And then the Najushi stands apart. So as far as he goes, he doesn't actually have a clan. His clan is the orc people as a whole. So the Najushi's family wears the orc symbol as their clan emblem. And they stay that way. The leadership always stays in the Najushi's bloodline.
Right. And the military leadership, too. When you get high enough in the military, in the officer ranks, once you reach a certain level, you have to make the decision, am I staying here forever, or am I foregoing my family clan to become one of the orc people? And the orcs become my clan like the Najushi, and I can step up into a higher level military ranking. Mm-hmm. So all your generals, none of them have a clan.
Yep.
So
there's actually a special spot when you enter the hall of like the called the Hall of Leadership. It's not actually Hall of Leadership. I had a name for it and I just lost it. It has a name. I will find it. We can post it up in comments. But when you go there, you actually temporarily turn in your clan emblem that you keep as a point of pride, and you're given a no clan emblem, which is the clan of the orcs as a whole and their military structure. But then you can eventually, when your service is done, you can go and turn your military clan back in, and you get your clan emblem back, and you can go back to your people. Or like Jeff was saying, you can continue to advance from the ranks, and that's like going from enlisted to officer. It's just a progression of time, not schooling and grooming and that kind of stuff. Excuse me.
You're excused.
So that's their military structure, and then their day-to-day life is very, very servanthood. They grow crops for the greater good of everybody. Everyone, every village, every clan takes and brings I think it's like 20% of what they grow, they keep for themselves, and the rest goes to Kungan. So they keep enough for themselves and to have a small storage if they need it in their small villages, but then everything else goes to the greater whole, and then Kungan disseminates it as is necessary to other places, or they use it for payment like they did with the orcs.
Or your higher up leadership who aren't doing farming and hunting and stuff like that would be able to eat as well.
Exactly. And so if you were a craftsman, you make things and you would actually barter goods instead of money. They have no money structure. The only race that has money are the goblins, and they're actually hated for that process. Like there's a reason for it, and we'll get to that, and I'm excited for when we get to the goblins. But they barter their services. So if you needed something fixed, or if you were a thatcher, or in the case of mason or a structure creator, you would offer your services to somebody for that purpose and then get paid in whatever you were lacking, or a service could be rendered to you at a later date.
Right.
So
pure trade.
Yeah, and it's never like someone was taking advantage of you. That wasn't the way the orcs operated. So interacting with other races was different to them, because the idea of trading favors for them was very normal. Like, okay, you do this and we'll owe you. And people were like, whoa. No. You pay now.
But when we talk about, like, so we've talked about before the different races and how they interact with the other races. So elves design and cultivate different plants and stuff like that, so that the dwarves can grow a mushroom in the mines, and the dwarves help solve problems and stuff like that. A lot of times when the orcs were interacting with other races, their role in the lives of the other races was more of a protector role. So if you needed a caravan protected while you were traveling from place to place or whatever, you would call the orcs, and they would have soldiers, which is why the military in the orcs are such a big deal, is because protecting your people is your thing. So military services would be a huge honor in the orc culture, and to get to go and say, like, the halflings need help getting from their home in Shota to Kungin, the orcs would send a band of soldiers to go protect them, because that's what they did, was protect. So that would be how they interacted with the other races on a large scale. That would be a frequent thing. And again, before the war, but
Yeah.
you know.
Because, I mean, like, you have the halflings, we'll get to the halflings as well, are the other, which is kind of funny that you chose them because of the other heavily militaristic type of race, but theirs was more of the nuclear deterrent in their own way, as a sense. But they would go and they weren't originally supposed to be militaristic. They handled negotiations. They were the ones that you went to if you had a dispute that was an aggressive dispute with another race. Let's say humans, for some reason, decided that their land cut into the orcs more, and the orcs were like, "Nah, dog, this is still plains. What you doing?" And then they would be like, well, whatever, bro, like, this is our spot, like, you can see in the, like, we found this ancient map and it shows this is ours, that kind of stuff. And then they would go to the halflings, and the halflings would be the ones who would negotiate that treatise, and then potentially, like, back it up with force. If, let's say, the humans were squatting, then the orcs wouldn't be the ones originally who would take care of that. They'd be like, yo, they ain't left yet. And then the halflings would have marched in and been like, y'all got 5 minutes or we start dropping bodies.
Yeah.
So our halflings are little warmongers. That's why it's kind of funny that you picked them. But yes, it's absolutely the orcs would still go and be honor bound, even though the halflings are a very formidable militaristic force, to escort them through the plains to Kungin and guide them through. And it kind of worked twofold, because you had an escort service and you had a protection detail, so they could always keep an eye on you and make sure that you weren't up to no good.
Yeah.
So it was doubled down.
Yeah, and I think the major difference between the orcs and the halflings, as far as that's concerned, is, like you said, the halflings become a little more like warmongering. So they were arbiters, right? And so when things started going awry, they became more warmongering in mentality, so they were aggressive. Mm-hmm. Whereas the orcs would still be a good person to call on to protect you, a good band of them, because they would give their life to protect you.
Yep.
That was an honor thing for them. Whereas if you called the halflings and you were like, hey, I need a group of soldiers to protect our caravan with halflings, they'd be like,
nah, dog.
Why would I do that? You know? And so formidable in combat, yes, but more of an arbiter look. And they became very self-preserving
yes.
in the conflicts that happened, and very, very powerful militaristically, but not really we protect the greater good, more of like we judge what's right and wrong.
Yes.
Kind of a mentality. So.
Yeah. And we've done with other races as well. We've talked about like how the kids live and how like the family life. We talked about how the dwarves have special schools so they protect their children from errant experimentation. The orcs all stay within their clans. Their mothers teach them the ways of the clan, different traditions that existed within those smaller clans, and then as well as they instilled in those orcs the servanthood. That's what the mothers took care of the kids, and the kids still go out and play. They could not leave their bubble fortresses, their bubble cities, or they get snatched up real quick. An orc kid playing by itself is like, ooh, snack time. There's way too much out there that would just be like an eagle and a Pomeranian, bro. It's an opportunistic thing. So yeah, like that's their day-to-day behavior. Is the women take it as an honor to bring up the next generation, and they're feisty, they're fighters. It's almost more like the Viking women, where they would teach their young to fight and protect themselves, and not in the same regard. Like if I understand Viking culture appropriately, they taught their sons to fight until their sons could take them out, and effectively the sons would showcase their worthiness by putting their mother in a position where they could kill her mother and not actually execute her, like the mom. And then they were ready to go and join their brothers and their fathers in the war bands and the raiding parties once they could defeat mom in combat. And our women kind of have to facilitate that same role, because the men are out doing their service and their work, or I mean, obviously, Dad will be there when he's there to teach and cultivate the militaristic side of things, because every Orca militiaman at some point in time, if necessary, they have a need to defend their home. They all get called up to do it. So yeah, there is a need for that militaristic training structure. But yeah, other than that, they would be taught their crafts, the crafts of their family, and then they would get to showcase their skills and then specialize as they got older. 16 is still their adulthood. That's when they achieve maturity, and can go and start their own lives and their own families. Not all weddings are arranged, but there'd be arranged marriages between tribal leaders and tribal chiefs and that kind of stuff as well. So you have families that were setting up these orc groups to be like, oh yeah, see that one over there? Someone in that family is going to be your wife. And then the negotiations would go that way, and it would be a beneficial, everything is for the greater good of the whole. And so to serve in that capacity is seen as an honor, but not everyone has that need to be an arranged individual. All right. I'm trying to think of anything else.
Any other questions that we have?
We do have something at TBIA. That's looks like a first time commenter, so appreciate it.
Hola.
Secret keepers, is that what I'm seeing?
Yeah.
All right.
Oh, hello.
TBIA 3 secret keepers.
I think Taylor knows who that
Taylor,
is.
do you know who those are?
I don't know who it is, but I know who it is. I know the organization.
Well, hello.
Yeah, we got some kid or some friends popping in from a whole different role playing group set, is my understanding.
Mhm.
Heck yeah. Well, glad to get some love from some other role players out there.
Yeah, for sure.
Heck yeah. And I don't know, anything else that you've heard that kind of piqued your interest that you want us to develop more?
I mean, I did hear about the roof crops. So what kind of crops do they grow?
We have specialized plants that have a whole book with a whole lot of names in there. But they have a grain type, but it would mostly be like self-sustaining, if I understand it right. And Jeff, you can jump in here. I've been talking quite a bit, so if you want to jump in on this one, have at it.
Yeah, so before the affirmation, when the world was still kind of a Pangea, would be when we're talking about, because after the affirmation, people didn't actually live in Kungin. And so when they did those rooftop things, before the affirmation, you could grow plants and stuff like that. And so it would be your standard stuff. So people grow a grain and, some fruits, some vegetables, some spices and stuff like that. And it would just be like, whatever you wanted your garden to be, so the rooftop was designed and large enough that it could give your family a little bit extra, think if you have, a 20-foot backyard or whatever, and you put a little greenhouse in your backyard, what would you put in it, right? And everybody's going to answer that differently. Like, maybe you put tomatoes in it, maybe you put squash in it, maybe you put parsley or whatever. And so the orcs would be the same way. They would just be on their rooftop because the ground level would all be streets, because it's so tightly packed. So you just go up to your roof, and then you have like a place where you can plant and grow food and stuff like that. And so it would be different based on what they wanted. So, and then a rough estimate of how many people could live in Kungin.
Could?
That's
could
a good
fit
question.
the
How many
entirety-
could live in
yeah.
Kungin?
We're talking, I would say millions is the number that pops into my brain, because you've got
Yeah.
both sets, and you can take most of the homes that the orcs are living in comfortably, and divide them into spaces and have more room, and they'd be happy to do this. They would happily vacate whole sections and go and make this less spacious for themselves, less comfortable, but provide the ability for people to stay and be safe.
Right.
So millions.
Millions could live
and
there.
and live effectively, but not comfortably.
Right. So
We're talking like the idea of like this the space universe where you have like 1 by 1 meter cubicles, or maybe more like Japanese living, where you go and you have like a small kitchen, a small self-sustaining area, and then all of it repurposes. You tiny living. Well, I don't know, I'm getting weird.
tiny living.
They're tiny homes.
The tiny homes. Yeah. But so like, could millions live there? Yes, but in the height of Kungan, when it was like before before the Great War, so that would be probably its most populous time frame is right before the war happened. You'd only have a couple 100,000. You know, 200 to 300,000, depending on like, and that obviously would fluctuate based on when people are born, when people die, and stuff like that. But less than 500,000 living there on a normal, you know, occasion. But still, like a big city.
It's massive,
so for sure.
You have
and then
whole different clans that occupy. So different clan members would come and stay, and they would prominently display their clan as a point of pride on their home. So you always knew what clan you were going to see whenever you would go to their house, and they would take these houses. The houses are drab. They're utilitarian. They're not decorated, so they would have like added splashes of color, different rug sets. Like there would still be some decadence that they would inflect. They would put some coloration and variation to customize their home, make it feel more like a home, but to the point that it could pack up real easy and go.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, and my home would look exactly like my neighbor's home as far as structure is concerned. Where the rooms are, where the kitchen is, where the bathrooms are, all that kind of stuff. And so Ian asked a question: would multiple people or families share one house, garden? You said they're like apartments. So the house could be in a oh no scenario where everybody has to pack in. Yes, they could do that, but no. Not unless it was in a dire situation. Once you advanced and became your own family, you had your own kids and stuff like that, you would go to a different home. And so there would be vacant buildings all over the place, and it would just be, you know, clean up one of the vacant buildings and put your clan symbol on the door and go.
Yep.
And so you wouldn't have multiple families. You might have more than one generation in a home, but you wouldn't have more than one family in a home. So I hope that makes sense.
And Dave, you had a question about the wall, but I can't see the whole thing.
Yeah, I'll keep reading the questions. How conscious are the souls in the wall? Are you dead and just like, cool, I'm sitting here all day as the wall?
So the dead are very conscious.
That.
The reason Kungan is clean, we don't talk about this a whole lot, the souls actually come out and do, like, they serve at night. Like, it would not be uncommon to see an orc, like an orc spirit, actively affecting Kungan as they're sweeping the streets and keeping them picked up from cleaning from trash. Or if, like, let's say something happened to a house, it would be orc spirits who would put that house back together if something happened and it collapsed or destroyed, on top of the orcs who'll be working during the day. So you've got effectively a spirit night shift who is aware of the city as a whole and not necessarily the living people in it. On top of that, clans exist together within the wall. That's part of it. Like, they have sections that they are set to. So if you are ever disgraced to a point where you are considered clanless, that's like being cut off from your people forever. So it's a huge deal, which is also why it's a big deal if you join the military clan. You are then part of that organization when you're passed out when you're committed to the wall, when your body is soul forged in, or your soul's soul forged in. You then join the military side of things, and you would be the ones who could deploy and be a spirit army to defend the wall itself. Like, you don't, their energy keeps the wall alive, but they also can use that to physically manifest and do work if someone threatens Kungan.
But in so much, so I think maybe Kyle answered it right, but I feel like there's another side of that question, maybe, and I don't know, but like, when your body dies, your brain dies with it, and your soul gets part of the wall. So think that, like, when you get added to the soul forge, your spirit becomes part of the wall force, if that makes sense. So the wall itself is doing it. So it wouldn't be like, oh, Dad's out here sweeping, the floor at night because he died, 5 years ago, so he's still around. It would be more of the wall itself manifests that, so that, a generic looking orc is out doing those things. and isn't conscious so much as the wall itself is aware. And so
like
your
a
soul becomes
construct.
part of the power of the wall.
Yes.
I hope that makes sense. You talked about clan symbols and how the leader wears the orc symbol instead of its clans. How do they show their clan symbol? Is it like embroidered on their clothes, or is it a special garment?
So it's a necklace for this. Standardly, what you would do is you would wear a medallion or a necklace, but absolutely you'd embroider your clan emblem into your, like, you're proud of it. You would prominently display it, and if you had especially if your clan had a phenomenal tailor, absolutely that tailor is going to do some crazy gold filigree, make some amazing patterns, and then make sure that their clan symbol is represented, because there's still pride.
You wear it on your cloak, you wear it on your sleeves, you put it on your door, everything. And so part of the reason the Najushi doesn't change clans is because technically his clan is the orc people.
Yep.
And so he would always wear, and then his family would always wear. So his clan is the orc people. So all the kids that don't become the Najushi, when he gets married, the wife comes in and becomes part of that. They all take on the orc clan as their clan. And so the Najushi doesn't have its own clan. Because again, that's passed down by blood, right? So that one's not something that they would switch out. You would be born into that, and so married into it. So Clat was born into the family of the Najushi, so he didn't have
married out of
a
it.
Separate clan.
If a daughter of a Najushi marries into another clan, then she would hang up her orc symbol, and take on the symbol of the the clan that she was marrying into.
Yeah.
So the patriarchy side of this is that the male figures are the ones that represent the clan, and the female marries into that clan and becomes accepted as part of it. And so their clan emblems are very sacred to them. To disrespect, destroy, desecrate a clan that's an offense that can get you, like, that's a blood feud. You have made a big mistake, and one of you, if no one mediates that, one of y'all is going to wipe the other out.
Yeah.
So it's kind of a big deal. And you really respect that. And every now and again, as we talk about, it's in the story that Jeff mentioned that we're writing with the Broken, there are clans that deviate heavily. The corruption that Vagog introduced brings about just a full-on disconnect with the actual purpose. And they decide to try to usurp or effectively move their clan status up through aggressive means. They'll get wiped out. And that clan symbol gets removed from history, and anybody who is seen of value or salvageable gets absorbed into another clan, or gets forced into military service, and they serve the whole of the clan, of the
and
they
lose
people,
their
and they lose their identity
anyway. So, and I'll probably say this a couple of times, but I want the mentality to kind of stick. So we're talking about the different races and the different things that they go through and how they interact with each other. I want you to think, like, we as humans on Earth interact with people and do things a certain way because that's who we are, right? And so when I think morality, when I think what's right and wrong and all of that kind of stuff, how we associate that in our world is different than how they associate it in their world, right? So I would say something is right or wrong based on a moral hierarchy that I have, whether it be cultural or religious or how I was raised or whatever it is. As a human, I have a hierarchy, and most humans in the hierarchy of like what you should do and not do, like murder is something you should not do, right? But there's a reason for that, whether it's cultural, whether it's religious, or whatever the case is. We have that hierarchy, and humans all have a hierarchy, and in our lives it's a little different. Everybody has it a little different, but we all have one, right? If you think the races in Savarion were designed with a hierarchy built into them by Parvulcan and Veritas Sanctus, right? And so when an orc thinks moral hierarchy, his brain immediately goes to, what is the most protecting my people thing that I can do? That supersedes any other decision they could make because that's their moral hierarchy, right? And so when we talk about all the different races and their divine purpose, that's how they view the world in moral hierarchy, right? So a lot of the questions, why do they do this? Why do they do that? Is solved by saying, well, if your moral hierarchy was, my primary function is to protect my people, how would I act? What would I do based on that? And so that I just want to flesh that out. And with the humans, it's very different. And we'll talk about that on Thursday. But I just wanted to bring that up real quick.
And that definitely creates some of the conflict. And that's where there's there's that misunderstanding. And I think when the gods built the 9 races and they had the halflings there, they understood that there was going to need to be a mediation, which is why the halflings had the purpose they had. However, it was also one of the big corruptions that made them, that kicked off the fall. And it's kind of interesting too, because that never goes away. It just starts to change after the affirmation. Their divine purpose is still there, and it creates a lot of confusion because now you have people who are forced to intermingle and having to adapt. And so they still see the world through the divine purpose, but it's had to shift and grow and evolve because after the affirmation, everyone's clustered together. You no longer have the segregation of the races, and you're able to stay within your culture. Cultures had to grow, and that's where the empire started to form, and that's when you had like the orcs who would be like, "Oh, these are my people now," and so there would be this natural shift of existence and thought process, and then the halfling would be like, "I need to mediate for my people," and so you become empire bound. The dwarves would also everything kind of became very, very loyal to where you were born. And so it never goes away.
And some of the conflict in their own mind would stem from sometimes when they intermingled, right? So the elves, like we talked about, are a matriarchy, and the orcs are a patriarchy. The orcs' divine purpose is protecting my people is primary, and everything else falls underneath that. And how do I answer to that? The elves, on the other hand, are how do I answer to I protect the world itself, nature, the plants, and all that kind of stuff. If an orc and an elf had a child, right, it would have this conflict of I need to protect the world and people. How do I do that best? And so now you have a conflict of interest, because if it protects people but hurts the world, do I make that decision, or do I make the decision that protects the world and hurts the people? And so you start having those conflicts. And then
you'd also have a divided household, because if you marry into a matriarchy versus a patriarchy, the woman is naturally going to want to be the leader in that family unit, and then obviously the male of the counterpart a lot. So you're gonna have a very interesting childhood dynamic where one of them either has to compromise or they find a way to exist as leaders in their own right within the home.
Right. And then you have to answer to which god that you're following. So let's say Theranik is peace, right? So now, do I choose to harm a person and save the land? Do I choose to save the land and harm a person? And what's peaceful? Which one is peaceful? And so that intermingles. And so it's so all of those things are happening after the affirmation. All of those things start to happen, which is why the empires form, and you have all these smaller factions. You have a whole bunch of different things going on. And there's actually so before the affirmation, there's a lot of conflict, but the conflict is very linear, right? The elves and the orcs are fighting, right? And that, there's a skirmish, or in the 1,000-Year War and the fall, the whole world goes to war, but it's, this race is fighting this race and they're going at it with each other. Whereas after the affirmation, because everybody's so conflicted and there's so much intermingling going on, it's the traders union is having a conflict with the caravanners, but maybe it's going to be okay, and we don't know for sure. And there's so much confusion there because of those inner workings that interfere with what's going on in their mind.
Yeah.
So
we've got a lot of different cool parts we get to talk about. I'm actually, because I think we're so heavily building the role-playing game while we're also setting up the board game ready to go. The board game is built, and we have the history that's up there. And so a lot of our focus has been on what's happening in the role-playing game world and the affirmation and building that up right now, which is why we talk about it. I'm also really excited to get to it because it is a very interesting point in time. because we talked about all these races who being forced together and the conflict that creates, and conflict makes great stories.
It's so fun if it's boring.
Right. If it's all peace and love without the right mentality, it's like, what am I doing with my life? I have no purpose.
Like, I don't want all that conflict in my personal life.
No.
But it makes the story
Yeah,
interesting.
it makes the story way more interesting to read.
So.
Yeah. You don't want that drama in real life, but
Yeah.
we'll provide some drama for you in other format.
Can play our game. We'll provide drama. So, I hope everybody got an opportunity, even if you didn't watch last week. Everybody got an opportunity to view the video.
Oh, heck yeah.
Go to Instagram or Facebook. The pinned story is our video. Oh, it's so good. I keep watching it.
Kudos to John, man. It is so gorgeous. Yeah.
Oh. But I think we'll wrap it up. We're running out of time today. We'll be back on Thursday, same time, 1 p.m. Mountain Standard, and we will be talking about the humans.
It is human time.
So, thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next time.